When the students arrived at the Whistler Hotel with Professor Murdoch, they couldn't get into the large VIP room, which was the only hall big enough to accommodate all 70 of them. Mike Tripp was embarrassed because he didn't have VIP access, and Penny Sutherland's call to cook was rejected. They were about to give up when Kevin handed his card to one of the employees. She was shocked for a moment and couldn't speak. Finally, she asked, "Sir, is this card really yours?" "What's wrong?" Kevin frowned as he replied, "This is the card Mr. Cook gave me. Is there a problem with it?" The concierge didn't answer Kevin's question right away. She walked around the counter and handed him his card as she explained, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you had a VIP card. Please accept my apologies for this misunderstanding." The student who heard this thought that it was a joke. Had Kevin stolen the card from the Jones family? That wasn't possible, they thought, because Kevin's in-laws weren't aristocratic enough to have one. So, then where did Kevin get this card from? Luther asked. Lionel started to question him too. "Kevin, this card has got to be..." Before he could finish, Kevin asked the concierge, "Can you please open the private room now?" "Of course. We'll take care of that right away. Everything will be ready in just a moment," she replied with cheerful promptness as she turned around to send someone upstairs to prepare the room. What surprised her was that out of all of the well-dressed students, it was the shabby one who didn't look like he belonged there who actually had the VIP card. She felt lucky to have a chance to remedy the situation before Kevin was offended. The head server came down a few minutes later to lead the group up to the top floor. When they got to the VIP room, he handed Kevin's card back to him and wished him a pleasant meal. "How did you ever get lucky enough to find a card like that?" Mike asked him in a sarcastic tone. Kevin's classmates thought Mike was right. After all, how could a good-for-nothing like him have gotten one of those cards legitimately? "Well, why don't you go out and find one yourself?" Kevin said coldly. He just didn't understand why everyone was still making fun of him right after he'd helped them all out. But then he told himself that it wouldn't matter anyway if he fought back. After all, they weren't even on the same level as him. Mike gave up and walked over to the entrance to ask the waiters to bring some menus for the group. But because Professor Murdoch was there, everyone hesitated to place their orders. "Why don't you order for us, Professor?" Mike offered graciously. "We're not in school, Mike. Don't be shy just because I'm here. This is supposed to be fun," Professor Murdoch responded as she gently gave him back the menu. Penny sat quietly off to the side and didn't have the slightest intention of ordering. Kevin was completely left out and nobody even bothered to give him a menu. Suddenly someone shouted, "Wow, they actually have a Grand Cru from Burgundy. You can't get that anywhere else around here." Kevin spat his water out when he heard his classmate say that. It was the same wine that Jason had ordered for all of the tables when the Jones family was celebrating Lily's contract with Williams Media. At $20,000 a bottle, the exclusive French wine was so expensive that they all had to chip in to "I'll pay the bill." "It's my treat, get whatever you want," Mike proudly declared. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. Even Penny gave him a strange look when she heard him say that. When the food and drinks were carried out to the tables, Mike stood up to give everyone a toast. As he raised his glass, he glanced down at the bill. What the hell was this? $375,000. $300,000 for 15 bottles of wine, Mike said to himself. Somehow he managed to look calm as he processed all of this. Then Lionel made an announcement. "Hey, everyone, listen to me. Take a look at this wonderful feast. Who else would be this generous? I think we should just elect Mike student leader right now so we can save ourselves the time tomorrow in class." The students all seemed to agree with him. But they weren't fools, and they knew exactly why Mike was treating them. Mike was very happy to see this. At least the expense would be worth it. He waved his hand and acted like it was no big deal. "Don't make such a fuss over me. After all, Professor Murdoch has the final say in the election. I'm just treating the class so we can all get to know each other better." "Don't be so modest, Mike. Who's better qualified to be our class leader?" Luther chimed in. The rest of the students just sat there quietly and watched the show that the three of them were putting on. But they didn't want to seem ungrateful, so they were willing to go along with the idea of electing Mike to the position. Since no one has any objections, then how could I decline? But let's just call it a temporary position. If anyone feels that I'm not carrying my weight, just say so, Mike declared as he raised his glass to toast his classmates. Professor Murdoch stayed out of the discussion and quietly observed her students as they drank their wine and socialized with each other. Meanwhile, Penny just sat quietly by the window nursing her glass demurely. Her classmates were too intimidated by her to go up and talk to her. While this was going on, Mike took Lionel aside and asked him to go down to his car and bring back a red gift box that he'd left in the trunk. Lionel came back a few minutes later and handed it to his friend. Then Mike carried the box over to Professor Murdoch and told her, "Please accept this small gift from me, Professor." His classmates all started to whisper to each other. Now they could tell that Mike had planned this all along. They'd let him buy his way into the position as student leader. On the other hand, who would have wanted to pay for 15 bottles of wine at $20,000 of pop? Of course, they were correct. Mike was definitely planning to run for the position, so he'd spent a lot of money on his gift for their professor. Professor Murdoch glanced at the gift box very stoically. "Mike, I appreciate your good intentions, but faculty members are not allowed to accept gifts from students," she pointed out very seriously. "It was already very expensive for you to treat your classmates to dinner tonight, so I think you should keep this gift for yourself. Please, understand it's just a small token, not a gift." Mike replied with a flattering smile. "Why don't you just take a look inside before you decide?" "I'm sorry, Mike, but it's just not appropriate," she began to explain. But before she could finish what she was saying, Mike opened the box. There was a cream-colored pill inside. Everyone gasped when they saw it. They'd all heard about what had happened at the Pearl family's auction house, and they knew a power pill was worth a fortune. So what was this herbal med and how much could it possibly be worth? Professor Murdoch was absolutely speechless, and she stared at the pill in amazement. When Mike handed her the box, she thought it was some kind of expensive jewelry, maybe a necklace. But this was quite a surprise. After all, medicinal pills were getting to be a very popular item, even among the faculty members at the school. Professor Murdoch had been at a plateau in her physical and mental development for a while now, and could definitely use a boost to move up to the next level. The room was absolutely silent. Someone suddenly asked, "Mike, what kind of medicinal pill did you prepare for Professor Murdoch? What does it do?" "A really good friend of my father's gave it to me. When I was accepted in the school for the healing arts, my father passed it along to me," Mike said with a proud smile. "According to my father's friend, this is an augmentation pill and it can help you really increase your power and mental focus." There was a huge commotion as they all started chattering. Had they heard him right? They knew that Professor Murdoch had to be very well trained already, so this would really make a difference for her. The students could only dream about something like this. Mike had really given their professor something very valuable. Professor Murdoch was in a state of shock. She'd only read about the augmentation pill and its physical and mental benefits, but she'd never actually seen one before. If this was really an augmentation pill, then she had no choice but to accept it from Mike. The heck with the school's rules and regulations. The way Professor Murdoch saw it, if she gave Mike a recommendation in exchange for the pill, then it wasn't really a gift. With her connections, there were a lot of strings she could pull to help him. Her mind was spinning with all sorts of ridiculous ideas. "Please accept it, Professor Murdoch," Mike said with a smile. Of course, he knew exactly what she was thinking. "Since you insist, I really have no choice," she said as she hid her excitement and took the box from Mike. Just then, they were interrupted by a loud voice. "Professor Murdoch, you can't take that pill." Everyone was stunned and turned to see who had spoken. It was Kevin. He quickly walked over to Professor Murdoch and closely examined the pill in the box. "Kevin, what are you up to now?" Mike asked him unhappily. It hadn't been easy for him to get Professor Murdoch to accept the pill, But now this jerk was going to ruin everything. Professor Murdoch, this isn't an augmentation pill. I can guarantee that if you take this pill, it will definitely do you a lot of harm. Kevin informed her very seriously. Kevin, you have no idea what you're talking about. Do you actually think my father's friend would have lied to him? Mike shouted. Mike, pay attention to your tone, Professor Murdoch reminded him. I'm sorry, Professor Murdoch, but this guy's pissing me off. Mike sneered at Kevin and continued his rant. I understand what's going on. You're jealous that I can get a pill like this and you can't. It's just that I'm from a better family than you are, and I'm also richer and more handsome than you. That has to be disappointing. You think you're more handsome than me? Everyone knows that just isn't true. Kevin teased him. What do you mean by that? Mike retorted as he slammed his fist on the table. Don't be angry, Mike. This whole thing really isn't worth it. Meinl tried to persuade his friend. Then Luther tried to calm him down. Relax, Mike. You're absolutely right. Kevin must be jealous of you. That's why he said there's something wrong with this pill. You still don't understand, do you? Both you and your father were cheated by someone. This isn't an augmentation pill at all, Kevin told them bluntly. An augmentation pill is more of a light blue color. Plus it contains some floral ingredients which gives it a beautiful fragrance. Take another look at the medicinal pill you just gave our professor, Kevin continued. It's obviously the wrong color and has no fragrance at all. They were all stunned to hear him say this. Even Penny reacted and stared keenly at Kevin. Mike thought about what Kevin had said and his frown turned into a vicious sneer. I really didn't expect you to go this far just out of jealousy. Let me ask you something. Have you ever actually seen an augmentation pill with your own eyes? Mike asked him. What makes you think you know so much about them? Ignoring Mike's questions, Kevin turned around and looked at Professor Murdoch. Professor, if you believe me, you'll give this pill back to Mike. But please don't blame him for it. After all, he and his father were both deceived. But if you don't believe me, then go right ahead and take the pill. Not only had Kevin seen an augmentation pill before, but he'd actually made one and taken it too. He decided not to argue with Mike because he didn't want to stoop to his level. As they say, let sleeping dogs lie. There was no way he could convince Mike he'd made a mistake. And Kevin couldn't slip a real augmentation pill into the box right now anyway, so the best he could do was to warn Professor Murdoch. After all, she'd already gone through years of training and study, so there's no way she'd be tempted to take the pill. Or would she? When Mike Tripp presented Professor Murdoch with a gift, she refused to accept it at first because school regulations prohibited faculty from accepting anything from students. But when he showed her that it was an augmentation pill, she was tempted to bend the rules. Unfortunately, Kevin interrupted them and explained that it wasn't an augmentation pill at all and could actually hurt her. As it turned out, Kevin may have overestimated Professor Murdoch's restraint. She was mesmerized by the pill and couldn't take her eyes off it. She hadn't made any progress in 6 years and was tempted to swallow the pill right now to see if it could help her improve her physical and cognitive health. Kevin, you must have misunderstood what Mike said, Professor Murdoch murmured. I can clearly see that there's nothing wrong with this pill. What did you just say? Kevin looked at Professor Murdoch blankly. Did you hear what Professor Murdoch just told you? You are so full of crap. With all that stuff you were saying earlier, it turns out you don't know anything. You are just pretending to be some kind of expert to get a little attention. How pathetic! Meinl mocked Kevin openly. We all came out here to have fun tonight. Don't let Kevin spoil our good time, Luther said to his classmates as he poured himself another glass of wine. Come on, everyone, have another drink and unwind. Some people have no idea what they're talking about, Mike sneered at Kevin. Then he turned and looked at Professor Murdoch. Go ahead and take the pill right now. Don't let Kevin's jealousy stop you. She nodded in agreement and swallowed the pill. Kevin could only sigh when he saw this. He turned around and walked out of the room. Out of boredom, he headed to the restroom to freshen up. Kevin just didn't understand what was wrong with people nowadays. Why didn't anyone listen to his advice? On his way back to the VIP room, Kevin saw Mike standing by the stairs with Luther and Lionel. They seemed to be discussing something in a low voice. Out of curiosity, Kevin quietly walked over and listened to them. "You really were impressive, Mike." Kevin had to be humiliated after that. Luther flattered his friend. "Impressive my butt, he's just a nobody. It didn't take any effort at all to put him in his place," Mike bragged. "What the hell was that wine? Do you realize that this dinner cost me over $375,000? Are you kidding? That's outrageous," Lionel asked as his eyes grew wide. Based on what his family had given him for living expenses in Chicago, the meal had cost about 10 years of his allowance. "I was planning to drop a few thousand on the dinner at most, but I never expected the Whistler Hotel to be this expensive," Mike admitted as he pulled out a pack of gum. "Dinner's almost over. If I don't pay the bill, I'll be up the creek and this will have all been for nothing." Luther thought for a while and then his face lit up. "Hey, Mike, I think I got an idea. I just don't know if you'll be too embarrassed to try it. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't keep us waiting," Mike said impatiently. "It's simple. Lionel and I will keep toasting you. After a while, you'll pretend to be drunk and pass out. The class is full of rich people who can afford to foot the bill," Luther said proudly. "What do you think?" "It's true they can afford it, but who's carrying around $300,000 on the school night?" Mike replied as he popped his chewing gum. "But isn't Penny here?" Lionel continued. "Her family's loaded. $300,000 would be a drop in the bucket for her. If you are out of it, I'm sure she'll help out." Mike was worried about this plan and wondered out loud. It wouldn't be a great idea to trick her like that. He really didn't want to make a bad impression on Penny. "No problem, Mike," Luther continued. "If Penny helps you pay the bill, you can use it as an excuse to get closer to her. You could even connect with her online to arrange to repay her and to get to know her better." Mike got really excited by this idea. He slapped Luther on the back and said, "I like the way you think. It's a good thing I brought you two guys along." When Kevin heard this, he quickly headed back to the VIP room. As he got to the door, Penny was walking out. Kevin came up with a plan of his own. As Penny brushed against him, he used the light touch that he'd learned about in the secret guide and took her phone and wallet. "Let's see what Mike does now." Kevin smirked as he slipped the items into his jacket. With all his posturing, he isn't really that strong. Let's see him show his true colors. When Kevin returned to his seat and sat down, Mike and his two buddies were just walking into the room. Luther and Lionel really put on an act for everyone. After a few glasses of wine, Mike slumped onto the table and pretended to be drunk. When Kevin saw this, he raised an eyebrow and thought to himself, "It's not a bad performance. It's a shame this guy didn't go into acting." After a while, everyone was pretty full and decided it was time to head home. "What the heck? Is Mike drunk?" one of the students commented. "No way. Mike can handle it," Lionel replied while he also pretended to be a little tipsy. He walked over to Mike and nudged him a few times. "It's late, Mike. Wake up. Time to go." But Mike didn't move. "Wow, Mike's really out of it." Lionel shook his head slightly as he called over to the server. "What's the damage?" "Sir, the total comes to $375,000, including $300,000 for the wine. We gave you a discount on the price as well as the service fee, so the total comes to $360,000. The waiter smiled as he asked, "Will that be cash or credit?" "Could you please repeat that? How much is the bill?" Lionel was a little confused. $360,000 after the discount, of course. The waiter answered as he gave him a very professional smile. The students were all in shock when they heard him say that. Even though they were all from wealthy families, they'd never squandered their money like this. Who could? "I can't believe we ate that much." Lionel shook his head as he continued to put on a show for everyone. "I promised Mike I'd help him with the bill, but that's a lot of money." It was clear to all of them what Lionel was getting at. He was looking for someone to pay the bill because he couldn't afford to cover it. They all looked at each other and wondered what to do. The students could help pay, but Mike was supposed to be treating them. Why should they have to contribute anything? Then Luther suggested, Kevin used his Supreme VIP card to open up the room. Why don't we just put the charge on his account? Then Mike can settle with him tomorrow. They all agreed that this was a good plan. After all, if that really was Kevin's VIP card, then he could afford it. If it wasn't, then it didn't matter anyway. Kevin almost laughed out loud when he heard what they were saying. What kind of people are they? He wondered. First they kept mocking me, and now they can't afford to pay for dinner and they want to put it all on my card. Pretty shameless. The server saw what was going on but continued to be professional and polite. I'm sorry, everyone. While VIP members enjoy a lot of privileges, they must settle all debts before leaving. That certainly got the room to quiet down. Nobody had that much on them. Would they even be allowed to leave the room? Although Professor Murdoch wanted to help Mike out, she couldn't get that much money together in such a short time. Why don't I pay the bill? Penny suddenly offered. They all looked over at her and started to relax when they realized she was going to help them out of this mess. But Penny didn't pay any attention to their whispering. She casually reached into her bag to get her wallet. After all, $300,000 wasn't that much money for her. Plus, it was just a temporary loan. Penny's face froze as she rooted through her bag and discovered that her wallet and even her phone were missing. What's going on? I know I put them in my bag, she wondered. Because she'd been taught how to handle problems, Penny was able to remain calm, even though she was starting to panic. She really has good self-control, Kevin thought as he watched her empty her purse under the table. The students started to get nervous when they realized they might have to cover the bill after all. It would cost at least $5,000 each. Finally, Mike decided to stop pretending to be asleep. He stood up and announced, I'm sorry, everybody. I just had a little too much wine and accidentally fell asleep. Then he yawned and said to them, To Kevin William, why don't you all head home? I'll take care of the bill. See you in class. Mike knew that he couldn't keep pretending or his classmates would get angry with him and the whole thing would have been for nothing. What's the final bill? Mike asked the server as he pulled out his phone. When he found out the cost, Mike looked a little worried, and then he commented, That's not very expensive. I don't have that much on me right now, but don't worry, I'm calling my dad to straighten things out. Mike phoned his father, Wyatt Tripp. He was a well-known import-export tycoon in Detroit. Dad, are you busy now? Can you send me $400,000? Mike bit the bullet and asked him, I'm treating all my classmates to dinner this evening. He figured it was better to be scolded by his father than to be embarrassed in front of his entire class. How much do you want? His father asked him. As expected, Wyatt started to freak out. Do you think money grows on trees? Didn't I just give you that much a few days ago? How could Wyatt Tripp not go ballistic? He'd worked his entire life to build up his business, and now his son was just giving his money away. Mike was frustrated by his father's response. He'd only gotten in the situation because he was trying to get elected student leader. If his father wasn't willing to help, he might have to tell his classmates the truth. What are you talking about, Dad? School's going great and my teachers are fantastic, Mike told his father, laying it on thick. It's definitely a serious program. What the hell are you talking about? When did I ask you about school? Wyatt shouted into his phone. I don't give a crap if you like the place or not. Don't worry, Dad, I'm doing great, he continued, but it would really help if you could transfer some money into my account. I'll transfer $200,000, but remember this, I don't want to hear a word from you about money for another year. Wyatt roared at his son. With a kid like you, I'll have nothing left to retire on. After Wyatt hung up the phone, Mike forced a smile and looked at his classmates. My dad can be a little long-winded, but the money's on the way. A moment later, Mike's phone vibrated and he knew that his father had transferred the money. Damn it, I'll only have about $200,000 left after I pay the bill, Mike muttered to himself as he handed his card to the server. While they were all waiting for their rides to pick them up, One of the students asked Professor Murdoch, "How do you feel after taking the augmentation pill?" "No change so far, maybe it hasn't taken effect yet," she replied softly. They were all stunned to hear that. By now, she should have started feeling something. They started wondering if Kevin may have been right after all. Lionel changed the subject. "Wow, 360,000 just for dinner. Mike sure is a great guy." They knew that Lionel was just complimenting his friend, but it certainly was true. Mike had done what he'd promised. He was relieved to see that he finally had the class's approval. It had been a successful evening and they'd all gotten to know each other a lot better. But as they were leaving, nobody said anything to Kevin. "I'll give you a ride back in a few minutes if you want. I only had a sip of wine and I'm in pretty good shape," Kevin said casually to Professor Murdoch. "I can tell you've been doing some advanced training," Professor Murdoch remarked. Kevin finished his coffee and then gestured for the professor to head out to the parking lot with him. He was wondering if she was beginning to see through his facade. After Mike's father transferred enough money to him to settle the bill at the Whistler Hotel, the students started to head home. Kevin offered to give Professor Murdoch a ride and she accepted. He was beginning to worry because she seemed to be starting to realize that there was something more to him than met the eye. "Let's go, Professor. I'll take you back to campus and then I'll go home." Kevin didn't pay any attention to Professor Murdoch's surprise and disabilities. He figured this was going to happen sooner or later. When they got into the car, Professor Murdoch couldn't help asking, "Kevin, tell me honestly, who's your mentor?" "Why are you so suddenly interested in me, Professor?" Kevin smiled as he steered through traffic. "I'm curious to know what kind of person was able to teach you so much at such a young age," she replied, without even bothering to hide her amazement. This comment surprised Kevin. He turned onto the highway and hit the gas as he entered her. "Professor Murdoch, some people would be hurt by a remark. If I've gotten as strong, it's only because I'm smart enough to know what to do. It has nothing to do with my mentor." She didn't reply to Kevin right away. Instead, she looked at him questioningly. Then she took a deep breath and continued. "Kevin, I was wrong about you. You've already made an enormous amount of progress. As long as you take the time to train hard and apply yourself, I'm sure you'll excel at the final exam 4 years from now. There's no telling where that could lead." "It's a little too soon to talk about that," Kevin responded very casually. Professor Murdoch wanted to say something else, but her face suddenly turned pale. Large drops of sweat formed on her forehead and she started to feel weak. "Are you all right, Professor?" Kevin asked her as he quickly slowed down and pulled to the side of the road. "I'll be fine, just keep on driving. It's probably because I haven't had any wine in a long time," she speculated. "Really?" Kevin frowned as he looked at Professor Murdoch. He could tell that this wasn't just because of a little wine. "It's getting late, Kevin. Just head to campus so you can drop me off and head home," she replied as she controlled her breathing to calm herself down. Since Professor Murdoch insisted that she was okay, Kevin dropped the subject. It took him more than an hour to take her to the school parking lot and then get home. By the time he got back, Lily and Dorothy were already asleep. Kevin took out his books on herbal medicine to figure out what kind of pill Professor Murdoch had taken. Based on the color and smell of the pill Mike had given her, Kevin was able to find it in his materials. It was a neutralization pill. Fortunately, it wouldn't be fatal to her, however, it would severely diminish any progress that she'd already made in her physical and mental training. After about 5 days, she would be like any other normal person, and she wouldn't be able to use medicinal herbs to regain what she had lost. "I can't believe that this pill can do all that," Kevin marveled. His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar ringtone. For a second, he wondered if there was a burglar in the house, but then he realized that the sound was coming from his pocket. Who would be making a video call to Penny in the middle of the night? Could it be her boyfriend? Kevin wondered. By reflex, he answered the call. A moment later, he saw a beautiful woman standing in front of her closet picking out clothes. "Oops, didn't mean to see that," Kevin thought to himself. She looked very familiar to him, but he just couldn't place her. While he was looking at her, trying to figure out who she was, the woman turned around to see why nobody was talking yet. When she saw Kevin, she screamed and disconnected the call. That's when Kevin realized that she was the young woman whose grandfather had taken the bad pill at the Pearl family's auction house. Seconds later, the phone rang again. The caller ID showed the same number as before, so Kevin picked up the call. "Hello, are you Kevin?" the woman asked. She was slightly embarrassed to have been seen by him in a video chat. The young woman turned out to be Penny's best friend, Mackenzie Knott. 2 years before, the Sutherland family had secretly joined the Myriads. What even Kevin didn't know was that the Myriads had been secretly recruiting a lot of powerful families over the past few years. Mackenzie was the one who had recruited the Sutherlands, and she and Penny had become great friends since then. Mackenzie was calling Penny late at night because she had something to tell her, but she hadn't expected a man to answer her friend's phone, especially when she was pretty sure that Penny didn't have a boyfriend. She recognized Kevin as the man who had saved her grandfather's life at the Pearl family's auction. "What's going on?" Kevin pretended to be calm as he replied. "What are you doing with Penny's phone?" Mackenzie said in a very demanding tone. "That sounds like you're accusing me of something. How do you know Penny didn't just lose her phone and I found it?" Kevin retorted. He knew that Penny would soon find out that he had her phone, so he decided to act like he was completely innocent. "I don't care if you found it or stole it, just give it back to her tomorrow," Mackenzie ordered him. "And what if I don't?" Kevin snapped back. He wasn't really worried. After all, he was friends with Brett Stewart, who had a pretty high rank in the Myriads. "What did you just say? If you don't return her phone tomorrow, you're a dead man." Then Mackenzie abruptly hung up. What the hell? Why is everyone so violent lately? One wrong word and you're dead, Kevin asked himself. Then Kevin thought about how different Mackenzie had seemed when he met her at the auction. The rest of the night passed very quickly. Early the next morning, Kevin drove to campus with Lily. As soon as he walked into the classroom, he broke into a grin. There was a new student in the seat next to his. "Meriwether, what are you doing here?" Kevin asked as he walked up to the man and rapped his knuckles on the desks. "Hey, get the..." But before he could finish what he was saying, he recognized Kevin and changed his tone. "Why, Kevin, what brings you here?" "I'm here for class, of course." Kevin smiled as he took a seat. Meriwether looked at Kevin and suddenly felt very depressed. This guy had already beaten him up twice, at the Jones family mansion and then in prison. Why couldn't he get rid of the guy? "Why do I keep running into you?" Meriwether muttered to himself. "What did you say?" Kevin asked with a broad smile. "Nothing," Meriwether replied as he turned his head away. He didn't want to look at Kevin right now. Fortunately, nobody had found out about the 2 times Kevin had beaten him up, but if it happened at the School for the Healing Arts, he'd be a laughing stock. Just as Kevin was about to say something else, he smelled a strong perfume in the air. Before he could react, Penny was standing in front of him. Everyone in the room noticed this. It was only the 3rd day of class, but they were all very interested in anything that Penny did. "Do you have my phone? Give it back to me right now," Penny said to him directly as she held out her hand. Last night, Mackenzie had sent someone to tell Penny that Kevin had her missing phone. As Kevin's classmates watched this play out, they were very confused. What was he doing with Penny's phone? Were they friends? "Great! I found it on the way onto the Whistler Hotel last night, and I was wondering whose it was, but everybody had already left," Kevin replied calmly as he handed it back to Penny. He'd already rehearsed a few explanations. "You didn't go through any of my photos, did you?" she asked him angrily. "Of course not, Penny. What do you think I am, some kind of perv?" Kevin replied as he acted hurt. Kevin couldn't help noticing just how furious Penny seemed to be with him. "I just told you that I found it. Why are you treating me like a pickpocket or something?" Kevin asked her boldly as he stood up to stand face to face with her. He decided that he needed to discourage Penny from asking any more questions. Otherwise, he might slip up and tell her the truth. "My phone is always in my bag unless I'm talking on it, so tell me again, where did you pick it up?" Penny interrogated him coldly. "I've already explained it to you clearly, Penny. Don't think you can bully me just because you're from a wealthy family. I may be poor, but I'd never steal anything," Kevin insisted breathlessly. She couldn't tell that he was pretending and thought Kevin was really getting upset. "Are you accusing me of trying to frame you?" Penny asked him. Then she got worried. "Why are you getting so angry with me?" Lionel butted in before Kevin could say anything. "Are you trying to intimidate Penny just because she's asking you a few questions?" Then Luther got up and chastised Kevin. "Don't be a jerk. Even if you didn't steal her phone, that's no reason to threaten her. How'd you like to end up down at the police station?" Meriwether saw his chance and decided to jump in too. "Call the police? You really underestimated Kevin. He's already done time. Why don't you ask him what for?" That really caused an uproar. Kevin had been to prison? Is that why the Jones family couldn't stand him? The whole class burst into laughter at the thought of Kevin being an ex-con. Meriwether sneered at Kevin. Now that he saw him being ridiculed by his classmates, Meriwether stopped being so afraid of him. After all, this was a school, not a prison. "I'll tell you what happened," Meriwether announced to the class. "He drank too much and got into a fight at the Salix Leaf Hotel. They sent him to prison for nearly a month." The students were all shocked to hear this. He really sounded like a violent person, and they shuddered to think what he'd do if he got angry. "So you've been to prison and you're also hard up for cash? Then you had the nerve to steal Penny's phone and expect us to believe that you just found it?" Mike scoffed. "Since you all think that I stole it, there's nothing I can say to change your minds." Kevin snarled at them. Then he looked at Penny and asked her, "But do you know why I took your phone?" Listen to that, everyone. The scumbag just admitted it himself. Mike shouted as he pointed at Kevin. Penny clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes flashed with anger, and right now she felt nothing but contempt for Kevin. This was the first time someone had ever stolen something from her, and it turned out to be one of her own classmates. Kevin was completely derailed. The whole situation had gotten out of hand, and he was running the risk of getting kicked out of school. "Please, listen to me, Penny," Kevin explained. "Mike couldn't afford to pay for the dinner last night, so he planned to pretend to be drunk and then get you to cover the expenses for him. He was also hoping to connect with you online. I was just helping you out." "Do you expect me to believe that?" Penny snarled as she gritted her teeth. "Are you still trying to pin this whole thing on Mike?" Their classmates all started to discuss the situation with each other. How could a petty thief have gotten into their high-class school? And none of them believed his excuse at all. While they were all mocking Kevin so horribly, Mike looked over at Lionel and Luther. They could tell what he was thinking. How did this jerk find out about what happened last night? They just shook their heads and didn't say a word. Mike felt really lucky that his father bailed him out last night, or he'd have been humiliated in front of the entire school. But Kevin wasn't feeling quite so lucky. How the heck was he going to straighten this whole mess out? Kevin had been backed into a corner by Penny's accusations, so he finally told her why he'd taken her phone. Mike couldn't figure out how Kevin knew about his plan to get her to pay for the dinner at the Whistler Hotel's VIP room. But Meriwether had managed to let everyone know that Kevin had been in prison, so the situation was looking pretty bad for Kevin. "Didn't I just say that you wouldn't come up with a decent excuse? After all, do I look like someone who wouldn't have enough money to pay a bill?" Mike bragged to everyone. "Well, you should know better than anyone else," Kevin replied calmly. "What do you mean by that, scumbag? Do you want to get your butt kicked?" Mike shouted as his temper flared. He started to roll up his sleeves and walk over toward Kevin like he was ready for a fight. Just then, everyone heard the sound of footsteps coming down the hall toward the classroom. Professor Murdoch walked in carrying a book and asked them, "Why is everyone so lively today? It's almost time for class to start, so let's all take our seats." "You got here just in time, Professor Murdoch. Kevin stole Penny's phone yesterday, but he's trying to tell us that he just found it at the Whistler Hotel," Mike said very sanctimoniously. "Mike, that's nothing to be joking about. You know that this school doesn't tolerate that kind of behavior, but I believe that Kevin would never do something like that," Professor Murdoch told them as she placed the book on her desk. "Now everyone go back to your seats. I have something exciting to tell you." In fact, if this had happened the day before, Professor Murdoch might have believed it. But now she knew more about Kevin and what he was capable of doing. If he was already trained as an apothecary at such a young age, there was no telling how high he could climb. She hadn't met a student with this much potential in years. So she was considering taking Kevin under her wing to train him herself. But she was worried that Kevin's classmates would tick him off and might even attack him. With his abilities, Professor Murdoch was probably the only person in the class who had a chance of stopping him. After everyone had returned to their seats, Professor Murdoch continued. As you probably recall, there was serious flooding in our state a while back, and a lot of the victims are still in need of assistance. Our school has always believed in helping the less fortunate. So last night, the administration decided to organize a fundraising event with each class forming a team. There's no limit on the amount that you can donate, Professor Murdoch explained. Then she got to the incentive. Whichever class has the most donations will receive a generous reward from the school. As her voice fell, the entire classroom went wild. What kind of reward do you think they'll give us? One of them asked. Whatever it is, it has to be fantastic, replied another. They wondered if the school might even give the winner some kind of advanced herbal medicine to help increase their intelligence. Professor Murdoch had already written the word fundraiser on the board. Then she wrote down a code for them to use. Considering that a lot of you don't carry much cash around, the school arranged for online donations. You can transfer the funds directly from your bank account. The students all started pulling out their phones. They were all from rich families and could afford to donate at least $25,000. A few of them even donated more than that. Just to show off, Mike immediately donated $60,000. Did you see that, Kevin? You still think I don't have any money? How could someone who's short on cash donate 60 grand? Mike bragged so that everyone could hear him. Mike's a great guy, and I saw Kevin steal Penny's phone with my own eyes. Lionel stood up and started jeering. Professor Murdoch, I think we should report this to the administration. Someone like Kevin isn't fit to be in this school, Luther said disdainfully. Professor Murdoch's expression turned sour when she heard that. Kevin, did you really steal Penny's phone? No matter how much potential she saw in Kevin, the professor couldn't let him get away with something like stealing. He'd have to be punished. For one thing, they couldn't afford to share their secrets with someone who might use them maliciously. That would be disastrous. Don't even bother to ask him about it. The best way to deal with Kevin is to have him expelled so he won't embarrass us, Mike said very seriously. The rest of the students nodded in agreement. Kevin, it seems like I've misjudged you, Professor Murdoch said sadly. She was already in a bad mood today. She didn't know why, but she woke up feeling even weaker than the night before. Professor Murdoch, could you please return my phone to me? Kevin asked her calmly as he walked up to the podium. I want to make a donation too. His words immediately brought laughter from the room. They all started to jeer at him. How could someone who's so hard up that they need to steal a phone make any kind of donation? Why don't you let him have it, Professor? Let's see how much money this delinquent can donate, one of them urged her. She took a long look at Kevin and then took his phone out of her briefcase, saying, I'll return it to you, but you have to listen to me carefully. First of all, from now on, as long as you're in class, you can't take your phone out. If I catch you doing it again, you'll never get it back. Then she added, Second, from now on, you have to be on your best behavior in school. If you get in any more trouble, I'll have no problem having the police handle it. Just because you're not as fortunate as your classmates doesn't mean you can steal from them. Kevin didn't say anything. He just entered the fundraising information into his phone and returned to his seat. Professor Murdoch also took out her phone and went to the donation website. Their class had donated close to $2.5 million, which pleased her to no end. I may not be too enthusiastic about some of this job, but with a little training I'll be able to achieve greater things in the future, Professor Murdoch thought to herself. Suddenly one of the students shouted, Quick, take a look at the donation website. This immediately got everyone's attention. They all pulled out their phones to see. There was utter silence in the room. They can all see that someone had just donated $500,000, and the name next to the donation was Kevin. Penny suddenly raised her head to look at Kevin. Why would someone who could afford to donate $500,000 steal a phone? Did I really misunderstand him? Penny wondered. She felt a little guilty. Luther and Lionel almost fell out of their seats. Nobody could believe it, but they had the proof right there. Kevin walked over to Mike and said, "You said I was so poor I had to steal a phone? Then tell me how many phones you could buy for $500,000. He said this loud enough so everyone in the class could clearly hear him. Mike suddenly got flustered. What is there for you to be proud of when you're just spending your wife's money? Anyway, my father's the one who gave me my money and I won't get scolded when I get home." Then Mike pulled out his phone and donated $500,000 to the fundraiser. Yesterday at night, he begged his father to give him more money for his expenses. He never knew that the money would be spent to save his reputation. He'd already spent $360,000 for dinner the night before, and now he was donating another $500,000. He hardly had anything left in his account. The students all saw Mike's name pop up on the fundraiser website and they were really impressed. Mike relished in their praise. He looked at Kevin with a self-satisfied smirk and boasted, "Let's see if you can match that with your wife's money." Kevin's classmates started to whisper to each other. They didn't realize that he'd been spending his wife's money. The Jones family would really be ticked at him for doing that. While they were all processing this new information, some of them noticed that Kevin seemed really calm. But Mike was starting to look very upset. "Wow, Mike, it looks like you're really rich. Are you sure you're in the mood to compete with me?" Kevin shot back. Then he took out his phone and donated $1 million to the fundraiser. Everyone checked their phones and saw that Kevin had just donated $1 million more. They couldn't believe their eyes, and some of them started to get a very different opinion of Kevin. Did this guy really steal his wife's card? Mike gulped. He didn't have enough money left in his account to compete with Kevin. "Aren't you going to match my donation, Mike? Remember, it's for the disaster victims." Kevin teased him as he added another $500,000. The room fell quiet again. They all looked at Mike to see what he was going to do, but it was obvious that he was very upset. Mike opened his mouth to speak, but he choked on his words. His father had already told him not to ask him for any more money until next year. If he called him again today, his dad would probably be so mad at him that he'd fly into a rage and come to Chicago to straighten him out in person. That wouldn't go well. "How come you haven't made any more donations? Don't you have any money left in your account?" Kevin chided him. "You were just saying that I'm a poor jerk who had to steal a phone. Do you still think I'm poor?" Mike stared at Kevin for a long time, but he couldn't find the words to reply. If he'd known this would happen, he wouldn't have donated so much money. Now he really felt like a fool. He'd been trying to make Kevin look like a putz, but he'd only hurt himself. Mike got so angry that he punched Kevin in the shoulder. Suddenly the class realized that Mike had just been trying to impress them all, even though he really couldn't afford it. "I can forgive you for insulting me, but do you expect to get away with hitting me?" Kevin growled as he grabbed Mike's wrist with one hand and slapped him hard on the cheek with the other. The blow knocked Mike back several feet and he fell to the floor with a thud. "Kevin, how can you do that?" Professor Murdoch shouted from the podium. "I'm sure you saw what he did, Professor. Mike struck me first and I was just defending myself," Kevin replied frankly. "Do the school regulations say that I can't fight back when I'm being bullied?" Professor Murdoch was obviously angry, but she knew that Kevin was right. When Kevin donated all of that money to the fundraiser, the professor started to change her mind about him. But after seeing him strike a fellow student, his good deeds didn't matter anymore. "Come to my office," Professor Murdoch ordered him. She seemed like she was about to lose control of herself. Kevin wondered what was going on. He could tell that she seemed a little weaker than before. He followed her into her office and stood there quietly. "Kevin, private fights are strictly prohibited here. If you dare to strike anyone again, you'll be severely punished, Professor Murdoch informed him. Are you taking Mike's side, Professor? Didn't you see how he was bullying me? Kevin replied casually. Then he asked her, are you feeling okay? You don't seem as strong today as you usually do. What makes you say that? She asked him as a look of panic flashed in her eyes. She hadn't spoken to anyone about how she'd been feeling. Did you forget when I said at the dinner last night? I told you that there was something strange about the pill Mike gave you and I warned you not to take it. Kevin reminded her as he shook his head. But you told me that you couldn't see anything wrong with it. Are you making fun of me, Kevin? Professor Murdoch changed the subject as she deliberately avoided talking about the pill. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep and my body hasn't had a chance to recover yet. You're lying to yourself, Professor. There's no need to do that with me, Kevin admonished her with a smile. If I'm right, you'll have lost all your progress within 3 days, and you'll never be able to get it back, no matter what you try. Professor Murdoch began to panic but quickly calmed herself and asked Kevin, are you trying to scare me? From what she knew about the augmentation pill, these effects Kevin was talking about didn't make any sense. It had taken her a long time to get as far as she had in her training, and it had brought her a lot of recognition and respect. If Kevin was right, she'd lose her position in the school, along with a lot of the connections she'd made with some very powerful people. Since you don't believe me, I don't know what else I can say, Kevin sighed. But please remember what I said, Professor. There are only 3 days left at most. If you change your mind in the next couple of days, just give me a call. I have a way to solve your problem. Then Kevin asked if he had her permission to return to class. When he got back to the room, Merriweather avoided any eye contact with him, but Kevin didn't really care. He sat down in the seat and waited for Professor Murdoch to return. Just when he was about to take out his phone to see if the battery still had a charge, Penny suddenly turned around and put a piece of paper on Kevin's desktop. A few of the students saw this and wondered why on earth she would bother to pass a note to a loser like him. After Kevin got back from Professor Murdoch's office, he sat down in his seat and started to check his phone. Before he could even pull it out, Penny turned around and put a note on his desk. The students who saw this started whispering to each other, wondering what was going on. Kevin didn't care what they thought. He could see the note that said, "Sorry, I was wrong about you." This made Kevin feel a little awkward. If he replied that's okay, it would seem that he didn't think that much of himself, but if he said too much, she might think he was full of himself. This isn't going to be easy, Kevin scratched his head and thought to himself. While he was trying to figure out what to say to Penny, his phone started buzzing like crazy in his lap. Kevin took a look and saw that he had a ridiculous number of messages from Gwen Archer. There were texts saying things like, "Why are you asking me about this?" and "Are you angry?" "Please don't be mad at me," one of the messages said. "I promise I won't let my brother fight Dalton again." Kevin was confused about what to do. He just asked Gwen about Dalton in yesterday's class when Professor Murdoch took his phone away. But he never expected Gwen to send him dozens of texts in just one day. After thinking for a while, Kevin replied to her briefly, "If you really want me to teach you to be an apothecary, don't let anyone bother Dalton Steele again. Otherwise you won't be able to get another power pill from me ever again." Meanwhile, Penny was starting to get very anxious. She'd only written one simple sentence. Why was Kevin taking so long to respond? Finally, Penny couldn't stand the suspense and she turned around to look at Kevin. She was shocked to see that he was playing with his phone with his head down. He hadn't even touched her note. Why was he ignoring her, she wondered. Penny wasn't used to anyone giving her the brush off. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. How could he do this to her when she just offered him an olive branch? But Kevin wasn't aware any of this was going on. He was in the middle of a heated argument with Gwen Archer. "Your brother took the power pill I gave him and then used his force against my best friend. And now you still want me to be your teacher? Is that all you think of me?" Kevin replied angrily. "I didn't have anything to do with it. When Dalton came to our mansion, I hardly said a thing to him, so don't blame me," she explained. Then Gwen begged him anxiously, "Please let me be your student. I'll consider Dalton to be part of my family and ask my brother to get along with the Steele family. We'll even come to an agreement on our conflict with the bar Dalton opened." Kevin grunted and simply replied, "I'll believe it when I see it." Then Kevin put away his phone. Penny's note had been blown onto the floor by a light breeze. While this was going on, Randall Williams was in his New York mansion having coffee with Seth Roundtree. After he'd gotten the call from Randall the evening before, Roundtree had rushed to New York as soon as he could. He'd managed to get there by this morning. "Mr. Williams, by joining the Myriads, you've made a wise decision for your family," Roundtree stated plainly, as he put his coffee cup down on the table. "I'll take you tonight to meet with the senior members. That way we'll all be clear about what we can expect from each other in this relationship. I'd like to talk to you about the herbal meds for my family," Randall asked him reluctantly. As long as his family was joining the Myriads, he wanted them to start making progress as soon as possible. "Don't worry, I have plenty of pills for you. Tonight I'll ask my people to let you have some of the construction pills," Roundtree reassured him. Then he pulled a training manual out of his briefcase and said, "Take this as my gift to your family to commemorate your acceptance into the Myriads." Randall had an unsure look on his face as he took the book. When he saw the title, he got very excited. It was Instruction Manual for Myriads Members, Physical and Cognitive Training. That's right. This is the manual that our organization has developed over the years to give all of our members a physical and mental edge over our competition, Roundtree explained proudly. "I'd only heard rumors about this," Randall exclaimed. "I can't believe I'm holding it in my hands." He was beyond excited. If his family mastered this training, they wouldn't have to enter anyone. There's a lot of valuable information in there. Some of it we developed on our own. Other things have been picked up by infiltrating various groups. Roundtree practically whispered as though he were afraid of someone hearing him admit it. "This is a truly generous gift," Randall said gratefully. "Look how happy you are. But don't worry. I can guarantee you that this is only the beginning. Once you join us, as long as you sincerely contribute to the organization, there will be more good things in store for you than you can ever imagine," Roundtree boasted as he leaned back in his chair. Then he said more soberly, "But there are other groups that are unwilling to share. Does that sound right to you?" "What you're saying makes sense," Randall replied distractedly. But at the moment he couldn't take his eyes off the manual that Roundtree had given him. "Okay, I still have some business to attend to. Make sure that your family gets started right away. The construction pills will be delivered by 10 o'clock tonight at the latest," Roundtree assured him, and he said, "I have to get going." Roundtree closed up his briefcase and headed out the door, leaving Randall to flip enthusiastically through the book. At the School for the Healing Arts, they included a physical education class in the curriculum. It looked a lot like what you might find at any ordinary college. The big difference was that their instructors in basic martial arts techniques had highly specialized training, and the class itself was grueling. In a 2-hour class, they only rested for a few minutes at a time. Kevin was assigned to Group 24, which was training close to Phoebe Anderson and Sherwin Blair, who were in Group 25. Kevin had already moved way beyond the basic moves that were being demonstrated in the class, so he found a shady spot and lay down on the ground where he could watch the rest of the students practice. Suddenly, Lily walked up to him holding 2 bottles of water. She smiled and offered one to Kevin. "Sweetie, do you want some water?" Kevin nodded and returned her smile. He popped Lily's bottle open and handed it back to her. Lily sat down right next to Kevin and put her head on his shoulder. A few of the men in the class who were interested in Lily were very jealous of Kevin when they saw this. "Hey, isn't that Lily? Who's that guy she's sitting with?" one of them asked. "You don't know who that is? I thought everyone had heard of him. He's Lily's trashy husband," another student explained to him. Didn't you say their marriage was on the rocks? They definitely aren't acting like it, he replied. Kevin could hear their discussions and he started to smile. He'd also felt that Lily had become more and more affectionate lately. Just then, another beautiful woman walked over to Kevin. Phoebe Anderson handed Kevin a bottle of water and gave him a pleasant smile. "You must be thirsty, Kevin," she remarked as she looked him in the eyes and completely ignored Lily. "I'm very flattered, Miss Anderson," Kevin teased her. "Don't forget that I still owe you a meal. When are you free?" she asked him. She clearly remembered that their dinner had been interrupted by Officer Emmett. Phoebe still hadn't properly thanked him for the Dream Lover necklace. Whenever Phoebe had nothing to do, she would start thinking about Kevin. That's why she'd brought along an antique Italian hairpin with her, so she'd have an excuse to spend some time with him. "I've got tons of free time. Just say when," Kevin answered playfully. "We can figure that out later. But first, I wonder if you can take a look at this Italian hairpin," Phoebe asked as she handed it to Kevin. She could feel Lily's eyes on her. But Phoebe was smart. She knew that she needed a good excuse to spend some time with Kevin, and her plan seemed to work. When Lily saw that Phoebe had an actual business-related question for Kevin, she stopped giving her the evil eye. But she still kept a watchful eye on the two of them. "That's a very nice piece," Kevin said as he turned the hairpin over in his hand. "It's genuine onyx and gold. The cameo looks like a member of the Italian royal family. My conservative estimate is $90,000. Their conversation started to draw some stares from the other students who were taking their break. Why was this loser so popular? If Lily and Kevin had such a great thing going, what was Phoebe Anderson trying to do? They just couldn't figure it out. Then one of the rich kids walked over and said very loudly, "You'd better not get involved with Kevin. Did you know he stole Penny Sutherland's phone at the Whistler Hotel last night? He was exposed in front of the entire class. I wouldn't let him near any of your expensive antiques." "You must be joking," Phoebe laughed. Then she added very seriously, "He's our antique shop's chief appraiser." The man's jaw dropped when she said that. He turned around and walked away without saying another word. "The cameo has incredible detail, but I think that the pin itself was probably repaired in the late 1700s, Kevin added thoughtfully. "Wow, you really know your stuff. Even my father didn't know that much about it, but you could tell all that with just a glance?" Phoebe gushed. Her eyes were almost shining with admiration. "I never knew my husband was so skilled," Lily commented. She emphasized the word husband to send a message to Phoebe. Phoebe felt some disappointment when she heard Lily say that. "I wish I'd met Kevin first," Phoebe thought to herself. Kevin sensed the tension. Just as he was about to say something to change the subject, he heard a firm voice telling him to have some more water. It sounded more like a command than a friendly request. The three of them turned around at the same time to see who it was. Kevin gulped nervously when he saw Penny standing there looking down at him. The student who had been watching Kevin so enviously for the past few minutes couldn't take it anymore. "What the hell is this? Now Penny's giving Kevin water too," one of them commented. "What's he got that I don't?" another one said. They had no idea what these three women saw in the guy. It was bad enough that Lily and Phoebe were fawning over Kevin, but now Penny was joining in. "What's this about, Penny?" Kevin asked her inquisitively. He couldn't figure out what she wanted from him. "I just wanted to say that I was wrong about you, Kevin. Take this bottle of water as a peace offering," Penny said coolly. No one knew just how conflicted Penny was feeling as she did this. She was from a very important family and was usually very reserved. It was a big deal for her to offer something to a man that lots of people in the school thought was such a loser. But she also knew that what had happened that morning had been her fault. She'd treated Kevin like a thief and almost had him thrown out of the school when he'd only been trying to help her. On top of that, when Penny passed that note to Kevin and he didn't reply, she couldn't think of any other way to make it up to him. "Don't worry about it, Penny. It was a simple misunderstanding," Kevin said graciously. He could feel all the eyes on him and it didn't feel too good. "I always try to deal with people fairly," she explained. How about if I treat you to dinner sometime? The more nonchalant Kevin acted, the more Penny felt sorry for him. She didn't say it very loud, but everyone heard her invitation very clearly. The guys who had a crush on Penny just couldn't stand it. What the heck did she see in him? Kevin was starting to make a lot of enemies in his class without even trying. Lily and Phoebe were also a little wary of her. Was Penny an old friend of Kevin's? Why was she inviting him to dinner? Phoebe was starting to feel very uneasy. She was already in competition with Lily, and now there was someone new she had to deal with. But Lily was getting even more nervous. She knew exactly who Penny was. She was from the most important family in the city, and she was also very attractive. Lily was afraid that Penny might try to steal Kevin from her. Right then, Lily promised herself not to let anyone take her husband away from her, and it was up to her to do something about it.